Namaste, my name is Saurabh Nanda and welcome to another episode of Such Conversations Matter. In today's episode, we have Ms Elizabeth Masamune as our guest. And I'm actually privileged to have her on the show because she has an amazingly diverse professional and personal life experience. Now, she started off as a linguist, but quickly she worked for almost 22 years in the Australian Trade Commission, where she would help with her skills of not only language but relationship building in making relationships for trade deals between Japan, Australia, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea, and so many other things. Apart from that, she currently sits on the boards of various companies in Japan. She's a senior advisor to a lot of corporate leaders, to universities in Japan, and a plethora of other activities. She's also the senior managing director of Awaji Youth Federation, and that is where I got to meet her and worked closely with her. Now, all this amazing life experience is going to make for some excellent questions for our interview. We're going to discuss her unique world perspective and also why she decided to almost co-found this youth fellowship in rural Japan. So, help me invite her to the episode. Hi Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Sarah. It's great to see you today and to talk to you after quite some time.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me at AYF. It has broadened my horizon to a limit which I never really expected it to go to. And I definitely want to thank you because you were there in all the interviews for the selection process. Well, here's my chance to actually officially, publicly thank you as well. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Oh, no, you're more than welcome, Sarah. We saw something special in you, obviously, which is why we selected you for AYF, and you've gone on to prove, indeed, that you have what it takes to, give back to the world, and I'm really hoping that you'll be successful in this new venture.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that. So, on with the interview, because there are so many things that I want to discuss with you. We've had so many conversations in Japan itself, but, it was always like, oh, the time is so little. And I think now is the chance for me to ask all those questions. So we'll begin, but first of all, I think it would be amazing, Elizabeth, if you could just share with us your life journey and experiences, how you came out to be the person that you are today at this position in your life.
Okay, well, it's really, to go back to my childhood might seem like I'm going back a long way, but I first developed a love of Japan and I guess a keen interest in sort of other countries and other cultures because of the fact that my father worked for a Japanese company in Australia. So it's called Noritake China, and they sell Chinaware. He ran their operations in Australia and was headhunted by them to work for them before I was born. So essentially from when I was a very small child in the early 60s, we had Japanese people visiting the home. There wasn't much for them to do on the weekend when they came to Australia, so they sort of spent the weekend with us instead. And what that did was to open my eyes to a different culture, a different country, to I guess people who, at that time in Australia, it wasn't that long after World War II. So, Japan and Australia were at war during the Second World War. And there wasn't much of a chance for people to, I think, experience that kind of culture at that time in Australia. So that meant that, when I was growing up, I was very interested in far more interested in going abroad than I was at staying at home, which I thought was boring at the time. And I discovered, relatively at the same time, that I had a talent for foreign languages. So I started to studying French in school, followed by Spanish in university, and then I realized that probably that wasn't going to get me a job. So I switched to Japanese because I had the connection, and obviously Japan being a very big trading partner for Australia in those days, sort of fast forward to the 80s now, that's when I decided to specialise in Japanese at university. And having done that, I applied for a few jobs after my first graduate degree with Japanese companies and Australian companies. And, of course, the Japanese companies, I realised pretty soon I would end up just serving tea. So I thought, no, I haven't done all this study to serve tea. The Australian companies, on the other hand, wanted to know were you an accountant or were you a lawyer or were you an economist, and they didn't understand the sort of value of having soft skills of being able to communicate with people from other cultures in other languages. That wasn't a valued skill at that point in time. So then I decided to go on and do a postgraduate degree in simultaneous interpreting and translating. I thought, well, if people are not going to value my skill as it is, I'll turn it into the pinnacle of, what it could possibly be. And then I became a professional interpreter and translator. So I worked for myself for the first couple of years in Tokyo, doing very high-level interpreting jobs. But unfortunately, those don't come around every single day. You don't get rung up by the United Nations every single day to go and sort of interpret. So I did a lot of work for the Australian Embassy interpreting for business people who happened to be coming through. And what I found in that process was that, I would go to a meeting with them and they would be making all sorts of mistakes in the way they presented their ideas or their case to the Japanese. But of course, my job wasn't to tell them how to do that. It was simply to interpret their words. I did my best to sort of, brush it over. And that's when I realised that I actually had more potential than to simply repeat other people's words. And I took a job at the Australian Embassy as a marketing officer. So I had to start at the beginning, the lowest of the low, of course, but I worked my way through the system to become a trade commissioner. And then at first I didn't really want to leave Japan because I thought Japan was my life. I'd sort of carved out this niche for myself. But then by the time I got to my early 30s, I had a very visionary kind of a boss. And I realised that in actual fact, if you put yourself in a particular square or a particular box and you don't want to come out of that box, it can be a specialisation which is good in the early stages, but then later on in life, it can be self-limiting. And I watched a number of my other colleagues who had gone down this path as Japan specialists, sort of have to look for the next position within the organisation. There are only so many positions in Japan. And so it becomes sort of a box which boxes you in there. And I thought, well, I need to spread my wings a bit more. And my very visionary boss said, well, look, why don't you go to Indonesia and become the Japan Trade Commissioner in Asia? And I'm like, wow. Okay. What we had discovered actually was that Japan's soft loan system, or the way in which they gave loans to India and other developing countries, in actual fact, it was up to the developing country, the country that had taken the loan, to decide who would be successful in getting the contract. And it wasn't limited only to Japanese companies to participate. It was just that they were the only ones who understand how to do it. So they were generally the only ones who were doing it.
Right.
So once we worked out that this was the rules were that anybody could be in it, and we did some study on how this thing worked, I went down there and I started to build networks with Japanese companies on the ground, and to introduce to them Australian companies who could participate in a consortium with them in these big infrastructure projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars, like railroads and cement plants and power plants and those kinds of things. So it was a pretty interesting world, and we kicked off this idea of three-way business between Japan, Australia and local companies in a third market. And that is something which is still going today.
Wow.
So in the early 90s, when we first had the idea, I got down to Indonesia by about 1996. It was very tumultuous at the time that Suharto transferred power to Habibie. There were a lot of demonstrations and we got evacuated. There was the Asian financial crisis back in the day. So it was a very tumultuous operating environment, but that was a real sort of baptism of fire, if you like, to come out of the sort of predictable environment of Japan and to go into a very unpredictable environment like Indonesia.
Mm.
And so having done that for 3 years, I was posthumously awarded a medal from the Australian government for the visionary approach and the fact that this had led to large contracts for several Australian companies. And then I was promoted to go to Vietnam as the Senior Trade Commissioner there. So I was promoted another rank to be in charge of the whole country. I did that in a fairly difficult, again, operating environment because now we're in a communist country where there are a lot of rules. And then I went on to Korea for another 5 years as Senior Trade Commissioner before coming back to Japan as Senior Trade Commissioner in charge of the whole Japanese market, which, of course, if you compare to the Vietnamese market for Australian exports, tiny, then you get finally up to Japan, enormous. So that was, a career trajectory for me and one in which I was very fortunate to have as my mentor this very visionary boss, who was in fact my boss for 17 years straight, which is a very unusual thing. He did retire while I was in Korea. I was beside myself, and my husband said to me, "Well, he's not dying; he's just retiring. You still get to talk to him."
Wow.
Then I got, after I ran the network in Japan for the Australian Trade Commission, finally they said to me, "Well, you've been offshore all this time. You're going to have to come home." So they promoted me even further to be in charge of all of Northeast Asia from Sydney. So I had about 250 people reporting to me at that point, which was fine in a way, but certainly not as much as fun as actually doing it out there. So I found that being a bureaucrat in Sydney really did not suit me. So after 2 or 3 years, I decided to leave the government, and then we decided to pick up stumps and basically, emigrate back to Japan, where we both really, my husband being Japanese, we both really wanted to be. So that's the very short version of my career up until I had to embark on Korea 2.0. So that's Korea 1.0. Korea 2.0 is, okay, I have been a very senior bureaucrat in the Australian government, but I wasn't an ambassador. I didn't have a title that the Japanese immediately could understand what that was. I was number 2, not number 1. And so when you come back and you haven't actually been on the complete inside of Japanese business and you want to develop networks as an insider, you have to reset yourself and you have to take away the sort of trappings of position that you might have had before and say, well, what is your core value that you can potentially offer, and what is your career vision, and what do you really want to do on Korea 2.0? So I decided on Korea 2.0 that for a number of reasons, that up till then, Korea 1.0 was dedicated to serving the Australian government national interest, and that had been my career through the Trade Commission. And now that I decided to emigrate back to Japan with my husband, I was free to, I guess, pursue the interests of Japan, my second home, a country I love very much, and that I decided I wanted to do something to help Japan address its problems in a way that Japanese themselves couldn't do because they didn't have the same experience or the same view.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all very well in the first instance, but you have to get people to think that they need you. That's the next problem. How are people going to recognise that they need you? And I think, for the first year or so, I spent a lot of time making networks, simply just sort of understanding the environment a bit better. I could have done what a lot of people do when they leave a senior government position, which is to be a consultant where you are a bridge between Australia and Japan, and you continue to do simply an extension of what you were doing before without the government hat. And I didn't particularly want to do that. So after some time, I decided that if I was going to stay in Japan for a longer period, or forever, that my long-term plan or my medium-term plan must be to help and serve the interests of Japanese companies and that they should be my clients. So I didn't try to pursue relationships with multinationals or with non-Japanese entities. And of course, the best way to do that is to get on the inside is to have a role as a senior advisor or as a director of that company. But saying that's one thing, actually making the sort of the networks and the connections that will allow you to be picked up and put onto these various things is another. So bit by bit, I was able to get more roles and get more exposure. And I decided that my 3 areas of interest were essentially empowering women in the workplace, because that's a big issue for Japan, and developing the next generation of young people in general, because we really need to have the next generation around the world, in fact, being developed in a way that will carry the planet forward. And cultural diversity being a particular part, because, Japanese think about diversity and they think that's just empowering women, when in fact it's being able to accept and use people from a multitude of different backgrounds. So I have in fact found, and also helping Japanese companies to understand what it is to really globalise their operations and think globally and act globally, using my trade commissioner experience. So that's where I decided I was going to focus, and then very fortunately over time I was able to develop roles, for example on the board of a Japanese university, in different ways, in projects that would give me a chance to show my capability. So by about the end of 2016, Mr. Nambu, head of persona, who I had known from my days as a diplomat, realised that I was back and I was around, and that's when he asked me to make the Youth United Nations, he said, in one word, and here's an A4 piece of paper, and that's what I think it should be, and off you go. So, and later on I met Alta-san in Tokyo, and she came to the persona headquarters and said, "Oh, well, I've been told you know all about this." And that's when we became partners in crime to actually build AYF from the ground up. So for me, AYF is a very special project, and I can talk a little bit more about that later, but that was for me another opportunity to help Japan address some of the problems that it faces. And subsequently I've been appointed to the board of listed Japanese corporations, and so that gives me a chance to contribute to enhanced governance in Japan, and also to give them advice on globalizing. For the company that I'm recently working with, Arakawa Chemicals, I've also started a women's empowerment group in that company, because chemicals is a very male-dominated industry.
Absolutely.
So
wow.
I've been able to sort of find ways to use my skills in a way that it helps Japan and helps Japanese companies. But this didn't happen overnight. It took, I've been here 5 years now, and I'm finally at that point. So perseverance and self-belief is also very important.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, just listening to that story is like, oh my God, here, there, and then ups and downs. Because I remember you told us the story about the tumultuous times in Indonesia. And, you also told us about that wonderful home that you had in South Korea with big snow and all those things. And this just brought to memory all of those stories that you had told us. Elizabeth, one question I always had was, you've had such an amazing work experience. It's one of the probably most unique work experience a person can have on this planet, I guess. Which is your favorite part? Which is the part that you enjoyed the most?
Yeah, people often used to ask me, having been in all those different countries, which one I liked the most. And it was really hard to say because I liked them all for different reasons. Obviously, Japan is kind of special because I don't see Japan as a country that I'm just passing through. Japan is sort of there, and it's part of who I am now. But look, I think I can't really single out. If in relation to Indonesia, I would say that the people there. For me, it was all about the people everywhere. I think, the environment in Indonesia was a bit tough, and there were times when we couldn't really go anywhere or do anything. But the people were tremendously genuine, fantastic smiles. You only have to think about Usman.
Yes.
And again, in Vietnam, different political regime, but people were tremendously helpful and willing to. So you just have to I think in every place, and the same in Korea. Koreans are sort of very hot-blooded and passionate about things. So the thing I enjoyed the most was, in fact, going from one culture to another, having the challenge of having to sort of get inside people's heads, if you like, to understand how they saw the world, how they think. That's the thing I enjoyed the most. And when the penny dropped and I realised, that's how they do it, or that's how they think, for me that was a great source of enjoyment. And it was, in fact, critical to me being able to do my job, which was to try to get them to see Australia in a positive light, to try to get them to buy Australian goods and services. Well, you have to understand how they think about things from their point of view. So that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, I think.
That's amazing. And I still remember and talk about the culture connector exercises that we did. And,
yes.
I've talked to, my network, people from Europe, people from Asia, everyone, and I've told them that, culture connector, that exercise actually exposed us to the fact that people can come from anywhere, but they're the same. And it's not easy to, just categorize people because of the perception of their region or country or even language. So all those things, they were so insightful. And that's where my next question also comes from, actually. When we know that, people are people, and most of them are inherently good, when we talk about people in the professional sense, which do you think matters more there? Work experience or life experience in general, or education? Which matters more when you talk about, choosing people for a profession or how they should go about their own lives, for example?
Well, I think education is important to the extent that it's sort of a building block, and if people don't have, depending on what kind of job they need to do, but if they don't have a certain degree of education, it's difficult to build on that. But beyond that, I don't believe that education is, what will determine whether someone will go far or not. I mean, I didn't have any formal education in business whatsoever. I was a linguist. I was trained as a linguist. But I had a good sense for how business deals were put together. So I think primarily I think it's life experience and the ability for people to make appropriate judgments about what needs to be done at certain times. And the other thing is, how they can communicate with other people. Communication skills are critical, I think. So, are they able to work as a team? Are they able to understand where other people are coming from? Life experience. This is more important than, I think education is like a foundation. But you can, if you pursue education without having any real experience to complement it, I don't think that's the secret for success.
Well, that is very interesting. And before I move on to the major question that I want to ask you, there's another very important factor. And in fact, in the previous question, when you answered and you talked about, your really inspirational boss for 17 years, how important is that there is a mentor or a mentor figure in your life?
Oh, I think that's, I think in terms of being able to grow and develop yourself as a professional and grow in whatever your chosen career pathway is, you definitely need to have that mentor, that person there. For me, there's been two constant people in my life. One has been the mentor, or the boss, who very, very unfortunately passed away in April this year. Just as an aside, because of COVID, very few people could actually attend his funeral, but it was streamed to the world, and there were like 300 people online.
Wow.
All of his, the people who had worked for him, had taken something different from him. So they were all sort of sharing their thoughts about who he was and what he did. And it wasn't something that I would have necessarily said, but they all had they all took different parts of him away. And he was tremendously generous with his time and his effort in growing all of his people, not just me. I was one of them. I think leaders like that don't come around every single day. But they are the sort of people that we need in this world. And he came from a military background, so his basic thing was, even although there might be some problem at the higher level in the organisation, you never leave a man behind. So if you were, his people, he would defend you to the absolute last. No matter how many problems you might have caused, we would fix them kind of internally, sort of thing. So I think you definitely need people like that who have got your back. But at the same time, he had tremendously high expectations of us. Most of the time, he set the bar so high that he knew we weren't going to jump over it. But we didn't know that.
Right.
So we didn't know that he knew that we couldn't do it. And so from that point of view, it just made us try even harder, right?
So there's another aspect of brilliant mentors. They spot in you what you're not able to figure out yourself. They identify those talents which you thought never really existed. How do they get to do that? What do you think? Because you're a mentor yourself now. How do you do that?
Well, you have to get people to realise they have a talent, and then most of the time they don't believe that they have it, or they haven't had a chance to actually test. There's no ability for them to use that talent. And so they haven't had a chance to sort of test that in reality. So if you want to develop people, you have to give them a chance to challenge themselves and to test these new skills, and you must provide that environment. So, the example I just told you before, where he basically just threw me off the edge and said, go to Jakarta. Right. In other words, he knew I had to let go of my little safety blanket, which was Japan. But I guess he thought if I had to let go of it completely and I couldn't have anything to do with Japan, that might cause me to have a complete breakdown. So he very cleverly sort of orchestrated this thing where he did actually just throw me off the edge, and it was sink or swim. So you need people like that who are going to put you in these situations where you have to rise to the occasion. And if you have someone like that, then after 3 years of doing that, I went, wow, I have achieved all these things that I would never have imagined myself doing if I had still just been sitting back in Japan within a 3-year time span.
Absolutely.
So I think, and just one more thing to say is that the other person who's been a constant in my life who has played a very important role is my husband. So I've always been the key breadwinner in our relationship, because when we married, he realised that I had the potential to go, very far, whereas he might have just still been a middle management Japanese salaryman. So he decided to become a graphic designer and just to have the flexibility to go around with me and support me. But not just support me, but when I came home and said, oh, well, this and that and this and that and that, he would be the one who would say, well, you're being too soft, or, this, and he would be the only one who would be able to tell me the hard truth. Even the boss wasn't going to tell it to me that way. And, of course, I wasn't always that pleased to be giving all these tellings off. But over the years, having someone who is prepared to tell you the cold, hard truth of how things are and what you should do as a result means that you don't self-indulge yourself in sort of doing things that you think might be nice because it's easier to do it that way.
Right.
And as a manager, you grow because it forces you to confront the hard choices, because there are plenty of those that you have to make along the way.
Right. Wow. So, Elizabeth, most of the people don't realize this. We all hear about, these big entrepreneurs who are self-made men, and they're amazing people, but they're not a lot of them, right? Most of the people, they have a different career path. I mean, it's pretty conventional that way. And somehow people don't find it very inspiring. But what they don't realize is that even these big entrepreneurs must have had some mentor or some person who would have pushed them off the cliff or go into the deep end, or have created that support system to show them the mirror that this is who you really are, right?
Yes.
So mentors are required not only for conventional professionals, but also for people, let's say, self-made people, I guess.
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, if you listen to Mr. Numbu talk about why he decided to start Persona and when he decided, I think his father was a great mentor to him. Some people get lessons from their parents, or some people get lessons from others who are very close to them in the family. But there is a source of mentorship, I think, for everybody who is wanting to take a different road. If they don't have one, well, they really need to get one. Yeah.
Right. So for a lot of people, it might just be simply chance that if they find a good mentor or not. But what if people who are actually consciously looking for a mentor, do you think our university systems or company systems, they have this thing ingrained in their culture to, bring about mentor and mentee relationships? Do you think that's happening a lot in the world?
Well, I think there are a lot of programs now, within a company environment or within a university. I mean, the university I graduated from, for example, has a program where they match alumni mentors with mentees, for their who are writing their theses on various subjects. I think with the university program, if it's with an alumni, that can work quite well. There's one girl that I mentored who still is in touch with me to this day, but it depends on what the mentee wants out of that relationship. The second one that I was asked to mentor, she just wanted me to introduce her to all my contacts, and that wasn't what was supposed to happen in the relationship. So I shouldn't make it that much more. I think within companies, what happens is that, for example, as a senior female in my previous organisation, I was later on asked to mentor sort of women who were up and coming and wanted to, step into senior roles. But really that was just sort of like, there's no one else for them to talk to. So would you mind talking to them? I don't think that's what really we should be considering to be a proper mentor-mentee kind of relationship. Yes, I was happy to listen to them and give them advice from time to time, depending on situational requirements. But that's more sort of, can you be someone that they can just talk to from time to time? That's not a proper mentor-mentee relationship. So, back to the core of your question, there are a number of organisations, I suppose, who are trying to do that more professionally these days. The only problem about a professional mentor-mentee sort of relationship is that it may be hard for the mentor to really understand the minute context of the challenges that the mentee is facing if it's within a particular organisation.
Absolutely. In fact, and that's the thing. Universities always had this fellowship program, which was primarily for research purposes. So you're a research fellow, or you would have, law practices. You'll have apprentices over there. But most of the people could not take advantage of being a mentee to a great person or very experienced person. And we've seen in the past 2 decades, a lot of these fellowships have started cropping up. Do you think fellowships what do you think is a fellowship, first of all? And then do you think fellowships can plug those gaps where this mentor-mentee relationship is not being, or probably is not very evolved right now in other settings like in the academia or industry and so on?
Well, I think in terms of a fellowship, how I would define it in my mind is that it's something which is developed to provide the participant or the fellow with a particular experience. And that experience can be anything, really. So AYF is a fellowship, and it's designed to provide a certain experience to the fellows. But that's just one example, and there could be many other kinds of fellowships which are designed for other reasons.
Right.
So I think that's what we should consider a fellowship to be. And the thing about AYF is that it's not a work program. It's kind of a work program, but it's kind of a learning program, and it's a kind of a self-actualization program. Everything all rolled together.
Right.
So I think with these fellowships, the participants really need to understand what is being offered clearly, and there needs to be support for people as they go through the program.
And I completely subscribe to that because, I felt mentored by you, by Olda-san, and so many others who were there in AYF. I mean, I had never really imagined that I would be talking to, ex-diplomats corporate leaders, leaders from the UN, and like all in the same hall, and constantly, frequently. So that was an amazing experience where I could ask questions and talk to these people and learn from their life experiences. So when you were designing AYF, and you've already told us about how you and Olda-san came up to and Nambu-san's idea about the Youth United Nations. When you were designing AYF, what went on through your mind? How did you choose? Okay, we will put these people, as the lecturers. This is how the program should be structured. What was the entire process about?
Well, I think, yeah, if we come back to sort of what AYF is all about, the first tenet of it is it has to be a globally diverse community. So the first thing that we wanted to do was to create a global community with a large amount of diversity in Awaji Island, which, as you know, is a remote, sort of a semi-remote island in Japan, which has obviously a very homogenous local community. That was the first thing. The second thing is, well, obviously to try to use the ideas and the inspiration of the participants to come up with new ideas of how to solve the problems of Awaji Island and how to solve the problems of regional revitalisation. For the fellows, I think the attraction is that they get to pursue some of their own ideas in a way that if you were just joining a company, well, then you don't get to do that. You just get to do the work that is that you're instructed to do. If you're going to a university, you don't get to do that either because there's a set curriculum and you have to follow it in order to graduate and get your certificate or your qualification. So AYF is kind of amorphous in the sense that there is the learning part, there's the doing part, and then there is the working part, which people may or may not find to be as enjoyable as they perhaps first thought. But the working part is important because it makes people realise this is how a Japanese company works at the front line. Right. This is how lines of communication work. This is how customer service is provided in Japan, and that's the whole objective of that portion of the program. So in terms of the lecturers and the learning part, we are fortunate that through the very high-level network that Persona has, we are able to access these kinds of people. There isn't a sort of a set. We tried last year to have, culture, some of the basics first, so that you could understand some of the basic tenets before we went on to other things. But I think we expected the participants, we knew that not everybody would be interested in every subject, but we expected the participants to take something from each lecture. Just like I mentioned before that, all of my other former colleagues took something different from my wonderful boss, that everybody would take something different from each lecture. So what you remembered might be different to what somebody else remembers, but that's okay. Each to his own, so that we are trying to support your personal growth and your personal journey through this program.
Right. And that is so important because people also learn by looking at how others are learning. And like sometimes also when you some people might have some preconceived notions that, oh, this is going to be a boring activity. Maybe it's a lecture, maybe it's a professional thing. But when you start noticing what other people are gaining from it, you suddenly get inspired because of some reason.
Exactly. So the main thing I guess we expect from people is we're not going to spoon feed them. We expect people to actually be proactive and, as you say, try to take what they can from every opportunity that's offered to them.
Right.
That's what the fundamental philosophy of the fellowship is.
That's amazing. So, Elizabeth, in these times, in these completely unexpected times, What is the future of AYF? How is it going to be shaped by the technological advance that we're seeing in educational technology now? I remember the first lecture where AYF alumni were invited from Professor Kent Calder, which I enjoyed tremendously. What is the future like? How do you plan to take it forward?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, Sarah. I think, like you, the Awaji Youth Federation has been tested by COVID-19 in the sense that we had our third generation of fellows who were selected, as you know, from a very large number of applicants, all lined up to come to Japan when COVID-19 struck, and of course, many of them are still in a semi-lockdown kind of situation. And we haven't been able to bring them to Japan. So we are planning, should all be well, to have the program on Awaji Island in person, to run the fellowship program in person with about 30 fellows on Awaji Island next year. But in the meantime, what should or could we do? And we decided that given that the program itself has started to attract this much attention, and we have over 1,000 applicants every year, that we would really like to build, take AYF to the world. If we can't bring people to Awaji Island, and to basically create a global community of members who can be involved in a range of activities, whether it be discussion forums or, we would deliver webinars online, online training. We are talking to a couple of Japanese government organisations about having some of their people participate in an online forum where they present about Japan and a number of foreigners critique their presentations, for example. We're looking at running online creative challenges where we might receive a problem from a Japanese corporate or a Japanese entity that needs to be solved, and there might be a small incentive or prize for people to participate in a short 2 to 3 week online competition.
Right.
And again, that's something that will help those members to feel engaged in the broader AYF community. And we will also be running some MBA-style coaching with Professor Daniel Chung for people who have a business idea and they want to try to take that idea to the stage where it can be properly formed as a business proposal, for example. So we have a number of pieces of content that we're currently putting together for the AYF Global platform, which we're hoping to launch in September, October, and try to get as many people as we can to sign up as members initially, on the basis that if you are a member, then you will be eligible to be selected for the fellowship. Right. If you're not a member, then you're not eligible to be selected.
But that's so many things, and that's so interesting. So my question was, so all these things are very exciting. How can we include more culture connector sort of exercises, which are best done in person, like I experienced last year in your sessions, online? Do you have any ideas for that, so that all the technologists, tech people out there, they can create products around these things? What would you like to achieve from online education technology?
I think I would like to be able to provide people with some tools and some inspiring things that would help them to grow themselves and to move in whatever direction they are thinking they would like to move in. And I would like to have a platform which connects people more widely, obviously, but also on a more consistent basis, so that there's a sort of a timeline and there's a way in which they can stay connected. So, as an example, with our third generation who were unable to come to Japan, we have in fact run an online program for them over the last 3 to 4 months. And that's been a wonderful thing. One of the most wonderful things to see has been the fact that they never met each other, but now they feel really connected to each other because they've been continuously participating in these online programs. Not only have they learned things, they've come up with ideas, and some of them are working on projects that they would like to do on Awajishima when they get here next year. So that instead of having to come to Awajishima and start from zero, they'll hit the ground completely running with project ideas and they'll be off.
Right.
So I think in terms of the broader community supporting what happens in the fellowships, it's very what's the word? There's a lot of synergy. Synergistic. But just for the broader community by themselves, even if they never end up coming to Japan or they don't end up coming to Awaji, it's a way for them to. It's a place where they can make friends. It's a place where they can, a safe place where they can feel they can reach out to others, and simply by exchanging ideas, they can get inspiration about things that they might want to do or they can do to fulfill their talents that perhaps they might not have thought of before, and they can. What I would really like to achieve through these online education programs is for more people to actualise and realise their potential, particularly in this very constrained COVID-19 environment that we have right now.
Wow. That'll be amazing. I'm sure they're having a very good time because not a lot of people across the world, especially during COVID-19 times, are able to do this kind of engagement with others and, co-create something beautiful out of this terrible situation. So,
yeah, I think that there's a lot out there now in terms of, since COVID has emerged. I think a lot of people have sort of said, oh, okay, right, we have to go online. And so a lot of programs and there's a lot of offerings out there online, but how many of those offerings are actually providing a way for people to connect to each other? I think that's the key point. I think a lot of it's sort of like, okay, you can do a lot of learning, but we're delivering the learning to you. We're not connecting you with everybody else who's doing this learning. So from that point of view, I think connecting people has to be at the core of what AYF does and is about. And AYF Global is about creating a global community of people who share a similar philosophy. And we were doing some brainstorming on what the philosophy is. And I think you'll appreciate this one. And so we came up with, be the change you wish to see, which I believe is a quotation from Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes.
And I think that's very apt for the times that we live in. And so we're going to use that as our byline, be the change you wish to see. And we would like to try to, attract as many change makers as possible from all around the world to be part of this new movement.
That'll be amazing. Elizabeth, to conclude the interview, I want to ask this question to you because it's very rare that I get to talk to people like you. You have seen the world go through so many different phases, ups and downs and crazy times. And then this happens. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you must be thinking, okay, I've seen it all now. So what do you make of this? What do you think, where is the world going? And where would you like it to go to?
Yes, it's a deep question, Saurabh, because not only do we have the issue of COVID-19 and, how and when that may be resolved, how many people may have to suffer in the meantime, we have the very fractious nature of geopolitics right now, which is very worrying. We have America, we have China, we have lots of, if you're in Japan, well, we still have North Korea.
Yeah.
And I know that the situation is similarly concerning for India. So the whole geopolitical situation right now is very bad. It's almost as bad as I can ever remember, actually. So from that point of view, I think we have got the pandemic, we've got the geopolitics, and
climate change.
I really think that there's got to be something. Well, one of the things that may emerge from this, I hope, is that when the vaccine is, when an effective vaccine is developed, that certain countries take the lead in sharing this vaccine with the world, and that the world can slowly come back to a share rather than a divide and conquer kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. And I believe that middle powers, such as India, Japan, Australia, and others, need to sort of form some kind of an alliance that will help to provide more balance in the world that we are right now.
Wow, that's an amazing thought. And talking of thoughts, I'm so sorry, but I had this amazing question that I really wanted to ask you. So one of my friends, he studies political philosophies, and he studied political philosophies ranging back to 3,000 years ago, both in Greco-Roman contexts or in the Oriental context in China and Japan, or in the Indian yogic context. And we were having a discussion, and we keep on pondering over these existential philosophical questions. So what if someone asks you, is there a single thing that you can do to solve all the problems in the world today? Is there a single thing that you can do? And I thought about it for a long amount of time, and then I came to a realization, actually there is. That single thing that we can do right now is, and this is just completely my opinion, if we completely give 55% of all leadership which concerns people directly to women, we will solve all problems. Like even in COVID-19 situation, the health minister from Korea, New Zealand's prime minister, Germany, Scandinavia, you see women leaders taking the lead, leading the charge. As a women leader yourself, what would you like to say about that?
Well, I do think that obviously women are, they're nurturers, and they're good communicators, and they're team players. So from that point of view, I think, yes, women are able to provide more inclusive leadership than men. And so I hope that more and more women will be able to step into leadership roles as the world sort of goes forward, because indeed I think that would provide more of the inclusive kind of leadership that we need. And, I recently I deliver a lecture every year to one of the more elite Japanese women's universities. I'm asked there as a guest lecturer. I do a lecture once a year. And I always start off with this question of, could you change the world? Could you by yourself, do you believe you by yourself could change the world? And of course, most of these university students, they all sort of possibly change the world. Possibly, they're only in their first year of university. But then by the time I get to the end of this 90-minute lecture, and I go through the example of Muhammad Yunus, I'm sure you're familiar with him. Yes. $27 he lent to 45 craftsmen, and now we have the entire grooming movement, which has most definitely changed the world and helped so many people in extreme poverty. and I'm a director on a charity which is one of the Remain Associated charities, actually. So I think you don't need to look very far to find something that you can do that will change the lives of some people. And I think that's where we should be focusing our efforts in this day and age. Not sort of how am I going to change the entire world, but how am I going to change and impact the lives of some people within my sphere of influence. And if enough people do that, change will happen.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for taking out time and doing this amazing, very insightful interview.
You're more than welcome, Sarah. And I'm looking forward to your ongoing support for Airway Global as well.
Absolutely. There for life.